My father was a Buffalo soldier, but my brother started research, and he started all about the Buffalo soldiers. He's found out all kinds of things about them, and he wanted to tell the story.
When we come and present a program, we want to teach the people more about the Buffalo soldiers today than they knew before they came in here. You know, we know that they know something about the soldiers. Maybe some of them heard about them, maybe some of them haven't. And we want to make sure that they have enough information to be able to have a good conversation about Buffalo soldiers. It's important to me because I was asked by two gentlemen, my father and a man by the R.T. Williams, to tell their story. And I promised them that I would, not knowing that it would take me 40 years of research and travel to help tell the story. My dad asked me a question when I was sitting at home on the couch. And he said, "Son, what did you learn about Buffalo soldiers in college?" And I have an extended major in history and a major in biology. And I told him nothing. He looked at me and he said, "I wasted my damn money." And he walked out of the room. I didn't know what to say. So I asked Mom, I said, "Mom, what did Dad do in the Army?" She said, "I don't know, but it had something to do with horses. He was in the cavalry." But I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was in the cavalry. And so that's when I started my research, a little bit at a time. And then I went with my dad to an old Buffalo soldier meeting in Kansas City. And there were old Buffalo soldiers there. And they were sitting around talking, and I was a fly on the wall. And they were swapping these stories about Buffalo soldiers when they were in. And finally one of the old gentleman looked at me and he said, "Son, they don't know about us." He said, "Would you tell our story? Somebody's got to tell our story." And I promised him that I would. And it's been a process that I do every day. I study about Buffalo soldiers and do research on Buffalo soldiers every day. I have more material about Buffalo soldiers than probably anyone anywhere. And people all over the United States call me to get information about the Buffalo soldiers. And I just keep looking. I do genealogy and things like that, and I put all the pieces together, and I found all the history that I can, because I want to keep that promise to my dad and the other gentleman, because I was so disappointed when he was disappointed in me. Why weren't their stories told? They couldn't write their own stories, because the men who became Buffalo soldiers originally couldn't read or write until they put chaplains in the Army to teach them how to write. So they couldn't write their own stories. And then there were people who served with the Buffalo soldiers, who were the officers, who could write the stories. And some of them started to write some really good stories about the men that they served with. And not one-sided from an officer's viewpoint and a soldier's viewpoint, just about the soldier in particular, and give us some information about the men they served with. And that was when the stories started to come out. The reason that there were white officers instead of black officers, because they felt that the white officers could handle the troops better, and the black soldiers couldn't take very many orders and could not carry them out, and would be horrible soldiers. The black soldiers were an experiment. A lot of the soldiers thought that they would fail and wished that they would fail. And so what they did, which hindered them for a long time, is that they only put white officers in charge of the Buffalo soldiers who were from the South, because they felt that being from the South and them owning slaves, that they knew how to handle these black men better. And that was just like putting kerosene on fire. It did not work. They treated them just like that they were slaves out in the field. And they didn't have success until they started putting chaplains in the army with the black soldiers and trying to explain to them what the officers are trying to tell them to do and what they needed to do to become successful, because they were experimental troop. A lot of officers thought they couldn't do it and that they would just fail. But it didn't happen that way. It took me a long time to figure out how I was going to tell the story. We could be infantry and kind of tell the story of the infantry, but my dad was a Buffalo Soldier. Didn't realize it would take me 2 years of research to figure out the kind of equipment they wore, the kind of saddles they rode, the kind of horses they rode, the size of horse they rode, what the uniform looked like, what years I was going to portray, and then who I needed to portray. And that took 2 years of planning, just putting everything down on paper. Make sure I had every T crossed and every I dotted. What kind of guys would I get for this unit? Because I wanted guys to be able to ride really well, shoot really well, and do all of these things that they needed to do. So I started recruiting men. And so I recruited rodeo cowboys. Then, because I went looking for black rodeo cowboys. And they came to the meetings and they said they would do those things. And then every time I had a show lined up, they read a rodeo. So then I decided I would take young guys that would want to ride. But I couldn't find any young guys because they were too busy doing what young guys do. So then I had to take guys who were 40 years old and probably older, who wanted to learn history, wanted to help me tell the story. So I started taking guys who couldn't ride, and I would tell them, we'll teach you how to ride, and we'll teach you the history on the other hand. And the reason I could teach them is because I've trained 4 world champion horses. So I'm a horse trainer and everything else I did on the side. And I train people's horses, but I train them for fun. I train them just because to see if I could do it. That was the challenge that I had. So I knew I could teach the guys how to ride. My daughter's a world champion equitation rider. And my granddaughter is coming along right behind us, so she's going to do a good job too. But we ride. We're a riding family. So I knew all about the horses. So that part I knew, to make sure the guys had good horses that they could ride, that they could depend on, teach them the history, and then find guys who were dedicated to do it and wanted to spend their own money to help me tell a story. Now that's the kicker right there. You know, we're a nonprofit. I couldn't afford to do all those kinds of things out of my pocket, even though I've done a lot of things out of my pocket. They have to pay for the gas to go to a show. Pay for the gas to them to this one. You know, and then we try to make sure that once we get them there, we try to feed them in some way. So we can at least feed them while they're there and help us do the show and help us tell the story. So it's a dedication on their part to find guys that are willing to do that. And you can't find very many guys to do that. And my guys are very, very dedicated. They like telling the history, and they want to learn more. And they will do anything to tell the story of the Buffalo Soldiers correctly and accurately.
So glad he chose the 7th and not the 9th.
We enjoy telling the story so much because we like the reaction of the crowd. We like to answer the question that they have because we had as much fun learning the history as we do teaching it. Because we're trying to teach them things that they don't know, and we're not trying to say, hey, you're blind, you should know this. It's just that I was just dumbfounded I had all these degrees and I still didn't know anything about Buffalo Soldiers.